Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for letting us dive into Matthew chapter 5. Father, I pray that you help me as a teacher. I pray that the things that your word doesn't emphasize, that I won't emphasize those things either, and the things your word does emphasize, I pray that you help us understand those things well. I pray that you would make us people that love your word, that treat your word as precious. I pray that we would be people under your word, not over your word. I pray that your word would convict our lives, call us to a place where we would be more conformed to the image of Christ. As we look at Matthew 5 today, I pray you help us. And we pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. So, what I want to do is look at Matthew chapter 5, and I'll just pull up the classroom Bible, and I do need to do this, I think. There we go. So Matthew 5, and as always, I want to just read through as literally as I can, and you follow along either ESV or if you want to try the original. This is part of Matthew's picturing Jesus, I think, as the new Moses. So as Moses went up on a mountain and expounded the law, Jesus is going up on the mountain and expounding the law. He's even going to dive into the second half of the Ten Commandments, 6 and 7. So this is what he says. And having seen the crowds, he went up into the mountain. And when he had sat down, his disciples came to him. And having opened his mouth, he kept teaching them, saying these words: Blessed are the spiritually bankrupt. Blessed are the spiritually poverty-stricken. Blessed are the, homelessly indigent people spiritually, because the kingdom of the heavens belongs to them. Blessed are the ones constantly mourning, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they are the ones who inherit the land by lot. That's literally what that says in Greek. Blessed are the ones constantly hungering and constantly thirsting after righteousness, because they'll be stuffed to the gills with it. Blessed are the ones showing mercy, because they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the ones who make peace, because they will be called God's sons. Blessed are the ones having been persecuted on account of righteousness, because the kingdom of the heavens belong to them. Blessed are you whenever they revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you as they tell lies on account of me. Rejoice and be incredibly happy, because your reward, you all's reward, is great in the heavens. For in this same way they persecuted the prophets before you. You all are the light, you all are the salt of the world, salt of the land. If the salt becomes stupid, becomes empty, with what will it be salted? It's not strong enough for anything except to be thrown outside and to be trampled by men. You all are the light of the cosmos. A city having sat on a hill is not able to be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it underneath a peck measure, but they put it on a lampstand in order that it shines to all in the house. So let your light shine before men, in order that they can see you all's good work and glorify your Father in the heavens. Don't think that I come to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Indeed, I say to you, until heaven and earth passes away, not one little jot, not one little piece of a letter will pass from the law until when everything comes about. Whoever should loose one of these least commandments and should teach in order that other men loose it, that man will be called least in the kingdom of the heavens. But whoever does the law and teaches it, that one will be called Megas, a great man in the heavens. For I say to you, unless you all's righteousness is more than the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of the heavens. You've heard it said to the ancients, you will not murder. And if someone should murder, he'll be guilty, liable to the judgment. But I say to you all, every single man being angry with his brother is guilty to the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, which means something like empty head, will be guilty to the Sanhedrin. And whoever says, you moron, will be guilty to the Gehenna of fire. If therefore you are placing your gift on the altar, and there you are reminded that your brother has something against you, leave your gift, and these are all singular, before the altar, and you singular go, first be reconciled to your brother, and then coming offer your gift. Be agreeing with the one who opposes you quickly while you're with him in the way, lest ever the one who opposes should hand you over to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the official, and you be thrown into prison. Indeed, I say, you will not go out from there until you paid the last penny. You've heard it said, you will not commit adultery. But I say to you all, every single one of you looking on a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye trips you up, take it out and throw it away from you, singular. It's better, in order that one of your members be destroyed, than your whole body be thrown into Gehenna. And if your right hand makes you, trips you up, cut it off and throw it away from you. For it's better, in order that one of your members should perish, than your whole body be thrown into Gehenna. Now it said, whoever should divorce his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to all of you, every single person loosing his wife, unless she's committed adultery, every single person makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman having been divorced is committing adultery. Again, you've heard it said to the ancients, don't swear, but pay your promises to the Lord. But I tell you, don't swear at all, either by heaven, because it's God's throne, nor by earth, because it's his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, because it's the city of the great king. Nor by your head should you swear, because you are not able to make one of your hairs white or black. Let you all's word be yes and no and no. Beyond that comes from the evil one. You've heard it said, an eye instead of an eye, and a tooth instead of a tooth. But I say to all of you, don't resist the evil man. Whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other. And to the one wanting to sue you and take your chitin, give also your garment to him. Whoever would compel you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. To the one asking you, give. To the one wanting to borrow from you, don't refuse him. You've heard it said, you will love your neighbor. That's quoting the Old Testament, and then this is not the Old Testament. And you hate your enemy. But I say to you, constantly love your enemies. Constantly pray for those who are constantly persecuting you, in order that you might become the sons of your Father in the heavens, because he makes his sun rise on the wicked and the good, and he pours out rain on the just and the unjust. If you love those who are constantly loving you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax gatherers do the same? And if you greet your brother only, what great thing are you doing? Don't even the Gentiles do the same thing? Therefore, you all will be perfect, just as your Father in the heavens is perfect. May God bless the reading of his word this morning. Now, before we jump into the questions, I know not all of you read Greek, but this is the Beatitudes. What do you recognize just looking at the Beatitudes? What do you recognize about them? Yeah, there's some prepositions there.
You said repetition.
Oh, repetition. You can see that there's an order there, can't you?
Even as a non-Greek reader, I can see symmetry.
Yeah, there's symmetry in it. So the first one says theirs is the kingdom of the heavens. So that's here. And do you see that exact phrase is mimicked here? Do you see it's verbatim and this is verbatim? Do you see you have a reference to righteousness in two? Do you see that you have an instrumental dative in two of them? Do you see that they all start makarioi hoi and then the special words?
Could you explain the instrumental dative?
I will, or locatival dative, I guess it's location. Blessed are the poor, are the pure. Where is the location of that purity? It's in the heart.
So the pure to the heart.
Blessed are the bankrupt to the Spirit or in the Spirit. How many are there? Kirby and I were actually talking about this morning, and I forgot this one. How many are there? Well, there are 8, aren't they? Two sets of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 8 are verbatim in the second half. They're much different in the first half. Blessed are those spiritually bankrupt. Blessed are those having been persecuted. So there's some kind of symmetry here. There's some kind of importance here. So it goes spiritually bankrupt, constantly lamenting, meek, constantly hungering and constantly thirsting after righteousness, merciful, pure in heart, peacemakers, having been persecuted. What do you recognize any of that? What questions do you have?
Why would he choose there's the kingdom of the heavens to bracket all this?
Right, and you recognize by bracketing them, it's making this one section. Why is he doing that?
Could it be because that is his main point? Jesus' ministry was about the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom and the coming of the kingdom. And saying all these things as it begins and ends with the coming of the kingdom, and all these things are included in that.
I think absolutely there's an element there. Okay, so I want to point out a fact, and it's going to scare you at first, okay? But this is going to take us to a good place if you'll give me 5 minutes. Okay, so who wrote Matthew? Easy question. Matthew. When in Matthew does Jesus call Matthew to be a disciple?
Later on, after this.
Chapter 8. Do you have a question? This is the longest continual record of Jesus teaching anywhere in the Bible, and Matthew tells us that Matthew wasn't called as a disciple until chapter 8. And so, on all these things, I don't want you to ever take my word for it. I want you to be a Berean and say, show me that in Scripture. And so what I'll do is I'll type in the word Matthew and hit return, and it's going to, well, I was wrong, it's 9. Jesus, as he passed by, he saw a man called Matthew, which is really weird. Matthew means gift. All the other accounts call him Levi. And he's sitting at a tax booth, which means he's a tax gatherer. That's the way you describe bad people in Jesus' day. Tax gatherers, and the only thing worse were prostitutes. So a tax gatherer is someone who bid. So imagine you lived in a neighborhood and you bid and said to the Roman Empire, I'll pay the taxes for this entire neighborhood. And so maybe you bid $2 million or something, and Rome says, fine, you collect the taxes. Well, how much tax are you going to collect? More than $2 million. So why were tax gatherers classed as supremely wicked people?
It's their reviews. And you can't do anything about it.
Because they have the right from the Roman Empire. They're kind of sellouts, if they're a Jew, and they enter collusion. That's like, the Nazis take over and you become a collaborator. That's kind of the level. So not only are you a thief, but you're a collaborator with a foreign power against your own people. So help me. How in the world, if Matthew isn't called to be a disciple of Jesus until chapter 9, how in the world does he record 3 chapters of a sermon that Jesus gave? And secondly, why in the world would Jesus pick him to be a disciple? Is this going to help Jesus or hurt Jesus? And let me tell you who else is a disciple of Jesus. Simon the Zealot. Okay. What makes you a zealot? I mean, if we translated that to today, it's going to be somebody who blows up police stations to protest the corrupt government. Someone who hates Nazi collaborators, tax gatherers. And so Jesus has a group of 12 people. One's a tax gatherer and one's a zealot. Help me with that. So Jesus says, I got some hotel rooms for us, and Matthew and Simon, you guys are going to room together. And you're Matthew and you kind of sleep with one eye open, and you're Simon and you don't want to sit down on the same chair as a zealot because that guy defiles everything he comes into contact with. Help me. What in the world is going on?
Jesus is painting a picture of what he's about, what he does, and what the church should be like. Blessed are the peacemakers.
Blessed are the peacemakers. And you're just kind of being practical here. Is a zealot and a tax gatherer your initial choice for a group that's going to impact the world? No. They're going to be people who look at your 12 and say, man, they have zealots there. And they're going to be people who look and say, they have tax gatherer there. But what did Jesus do? Well, he only changed the world in every culture he's ever come in contact with. So maybe we should give Jesus the benefit of the doubt. How in the world did Matthew get this sermon? It's clear that the sermon isn't in Mark. There's a slightly similar partial sermon in Luke. That's called the Sermon on the Plain. This is called the Sermon on the Mount. We know where this happened, so it's called the Mount of Beatitudes, and the top of the Mount of Beatitudes is flat, so it's a little flat. You could call it a plain. It's not really what I would call a plain if I were in Israel. There are really flat places in Israel. So it seems to me that Luke is perhaps covering a different time, but there are plenty of people who think that Luke is giving the same sermon. I'm not sure I buy that. There are parts of the same sermon, but there's good disagreement as well in terms of actual words.
So Matthew probably knew this because it's probably something Jesus had been saying over and over.
So help me. Where did Matthew get it from? Let's say he preached it more than once. Why in the world would Matthew record this sermon prior to his being called as a disciple in Matthew chapter 9? And how in the world does Jesus know that Matthew is the one he should pick?
He knows who to pick.
Well, after like this whole, especially chapter 5, it's talking about, usually talks about the sheep and it's about not only being perfect in the physical aspect of the law, but in the spiritual and mental aspect as well. So it's like Jesus is requiring perfect obedience, and
He's preaching the law.
he's preaching the law. So when he calls Matthew seems like the last person to pick, because a tax collector basically goes against everything that the Jews believe and stand for, and they just hate them. But Jesus shows that he can make us perfect. Like, I feel like by picking Matthew, it's an example of how we don't have to be previously perfect in the law, but he
Yeah.
can take us
Yeah,
even while we're, still in sin.
yeah. Prior to Matthew's call, what characterized his life? What action, if you had to pick a verb, what action would characterize who Matthew was at the core of his being?
Grasping, swimmer.
Would Taker be a pretty good name? So how in the world does he get the name Gift? How in the world does somebody wishy-washy as Simon get the name Rock?
The way that I've always read this passage, and it's something that I continually come back to in my scripture readings, is whereas Moses got the law on tablets, Jesus is speaking the law to our hearts. He's saying, you must be this way, and you can only be this way in me, for I'm the one who can fulfill the law, and I can give you the righteousness that exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees.
That can make you perfect. How would it strike you? Well, let me just show my cards here. What if Matthew was there? Maybe he's sitting in the back row. Maybe nobody even wants to be around him, and he's there. How do you think it struck Matthew to hear, "Blessed are those who are spiritually penniless, because the kingdom of heavens belongs to those people"? How would that strike you if you were an outcast Jew who knew you're going to hell, you're going straight to hell, you have no hope whatsoever in life? How would it strike you to hear, "Blessed are those who are absolutely spiritually penniless, because they're the ones who own the kingdom of heaven"?
Completely contrary to every motive in the thinking.
Yeah.
I think it can be some comfort and make you want to know more about what he's talking about.
Yeah, don't you imagine if Matthew was there, that got him? It's like, I'm bankrupt. I'm spiritually bankrupt. I have no hope whatsoever of being righteous enough to go to heaven. And Jesus starts off by saying, people like that are blessed. People like that are Abel, whose name means the nothing, the emptiness, the vanity. And yet he comes offering only the gift that God had showed him how to offer through Adam and Eve. He had nothing to commend him to God, and God accepted him as righteous. And what did that utter reliance on God alone for mercy do to someone who was not relying on God alone for mercy? What did his brother, the acquired one, God's gift, think about helpless, utter reliance on only Jesus? What did his brother think of that?
You persecuted him for righteousness' sake.
Do you see the inclusio maybe? Matthew got the truth that whatever Jesus was talking about, he was talking about saving people who had no hope of being saved. But when people come to Jesus in that helpless reliance on him alone, what do the people who are good think about that helpless reliance? They hate it. They hate it with a rage. Perhaps is it not the spiritually bankrupt inherently who constantly recognize that they're nothing before God, that those are the ones who in time become the ones who are having been persecuted? Is perhaps that the inclusio? Is it recognizing your utter bankruptcy and weeping over that then you're comforted? Is it the meek who will inherit the land by lot? I had read this passage a long, long, long time before I ever recognized in Greek, that the word inherit is the word kleros, which means dice or lot, and then nomeo, law, the land. So I remember, is there any place in the Bible where people inherit land by lot? The promised land. And I remember thinking to myself, I wonder in Greek if klero, no, and I don't know if it's meo or mao, and gay appear anywhere together in the Bible. Now I want you to look at this, okay? Klero, no, me, susin, that susin is they will inherit, so klero, no, meo, tain, gain. Does that occur anywhere else in the Bible? You tell me. And we're going to do this one time in Greek because it's easier to see in Greek. Klero nomeo, tain, gain. Klero nomeo, tain, gain. Klero nomeo. Klero nomeo, tain, gain. Klero nomeo. Is there a theme here? Klero nomeo, tain, gain. We go any of these, it's klero nomeo, tain, gain. Okay, and who's the one who divvies out that klero nomeo, tain, gain in the Old Testament? Remind me what his name is?
Yeshua.
Okay, there's somebody else in this story named Yeshua. I'm trying to think. Jesus is talking about klero nomeo, tain, gain. That's what I said. Does Matthew have the slightest hope of inheriting the land as a true Israelite? Worldly speaking. And Jesus is talking about meek people. Klero nemeo tain gain.
He would have been like Achan, is there?
Yeah, just tell me what you did. Well, as a tax gatherer, I stole from people. Great, stand right here while we stone you and your family to death. Versus Jesus, who says, what did you do? I stole money from people and I got rich and I was a collaborator. And Jesus, as the new Joshua, says, stand here while people stone me to death. That's why the Old Testament says the valley of Achor will be a door of hope. The valley of Achor is where they stoned Achan to death, giving him exactly what he deserved. And you say, how in the world can the valley of Achor ever be a hope for anybody? It'll be a door of hope if you have a better Joshua. And Matthew realized he did have a better Joshua. A Joshua who is a better Moses.
Something that struck me was that Matthew was a tax collector, but he still knew all this about the Old Testament, so he was a learner. He wasn't stupid. Didn't study his Bible.
Yeah. Which almost makes him more guilty, doesn't it? Okay, so Jesus gives initial hope. And do you know the Sermon on the Mount is 17 minutes long? You read it start to close, it's 17 minutes. Okay, people memorize the Sermon on the Mount word for word. Has anybody ever memorized anything you've said word for word? Jesus preached 17 minutes and he changed the world. He preached a sermon that Matthew committed to memory. That's where he got it from. He memorized it. He thought about it over and over. And you know what? I think how Jesus knew to call Matthew is the same way he knew how to call the other disciples. And that is, he started looking for people that God was working in their life. And when James and John were disciples of John the Baptist and out in the middle of nowhere confessing their sins, Jesus said, that isn't normal. I think God's working in their lives. You two come follow me. Peter and Andrew, same. You two follow me. Philip, Nathaniel, same place. You two follow me. And Matthew, sitting on the edge of his seat in the back of the auditorium or the back of the place there, Jesus saw him soaking up every word and he said, you follow me. Because he knew that God was working in that guy's life. He could see it on his face. And yeah, it was going to cost Jesus initially. But Jesus knew that God was going to turn Matthew into a gift. He was going to turn him into the ultimate giver. I think the reason the other disciples call him Levi and he calls himself Matthew is because he calls himself by the new name that Jesus gave him. And have you ever thought about this, that you have a secret name in heaven? And I can tell you what it probably is. It's probably the exact opposite of what you are inherently. So you think of what trips you up most as a person. You've probably got a name in heaven that has something to do with the supreme virtue of doing the exact opposite of that. Because that's who you're going to become in Jesus in time. I mean, you take someone who's very cowardly, just the ultimate coward, just run away from anything. And Jesus says, you're the lion-hearted, you're the one who turns back the enemy at the gate. And you look at yourself and you say, but God, I'm a 98-pound weakling. And Jesus says, that's who you are right now, but trust me, that's not who you're going to end up being. You're going to be the Lionheart. You're going to be the one who turns the battle back at the gate. You're going to be the warrior, because that's who I'm going to make you. Jesus likes to name people the opposite of what they are, because that's who they become in him. So Jesus starts this sermon. It goes 5, 6, and 7. So we're in just the first few minutes of it. He starts with this catchy, memorable 8-point inclusio, but then he switches it. You are blessed whenever they revile you, whenever they persecute you. So you ask yourself, why did he give 8, and then why does he switch to you all here listening? I wonder if the background of that isn't Israel was created to be God's light. Israel was created to be the missionary venture to the world. That's why 70 people go down to Egypt. There are 70 nations. The problem is God's intended missionary work for them failed. And Jesus is pointing out that failure, I think. He's saying, if the salt of the earth becomes stupid, how will you make it salty again? And the answer is you can't. He says, you're the light of the world, ta phos tu cosmu. You're the light of the cosmos. A city set on a hill can't be hid. So I know that Jesus grew up in a little town called Nazareth. Okay. Nazareth, if we were writing the Bible today, the name of Nazareth would be Hicksville. I mean, this is the city people made fun of. Okay. If you think about where you grew up, is there a place that you just say the word and people laugh? That's what Nazareth is. Did you know that Nazareth was on the outskirts of another huge town? Did you know that? So, did you know the town that Nazareth was on the outskirts of had 5 universities? Did you know it had a 4,000-seat amphitheater? Now, think of that. 800 people can sit in Rudd. A town less than 5 miles from Nazareth had a place where 4,000 people could sit and watch entertainment. The town is called Sepphoris, which means the winged city or the flying city. And the reason they call it the flying city is because it's set on a hill. Sepphoris had an ingenious water system where they pumped water up the hill so that the people on the top of the hill could all have water. They did that mechanically with some kind of water device. Sepphoris had an 1,100-year history. If you're online, type in Mona Lisa of Galilee, and they're going to show you a floor of a mansion in Sepphoris with a woman's face, and it's as beautiful as the Mona Lisa. They call her the Mona Lisa of Galilee. That was somebody's carpet. Okay? Sepphoris was a rich city. What do you think Sepphoris looked like at night when people had lamps lit? You're out in the pitch black darkness of the boonies and you're looking 5 miles, which is basically here to the other side of the Walmart, what would that city on a hill look like? It'd be beautiful. So Jesus is taking an example, and this is odd, isn't it? Nobody's ever heard of Sepphoris. You can go to Israel and never hear of Sepphoris. Hardly a trace of 5 universities. Not hardly a trace of the entire 1100s. And everybody in the world's heard of Nazareth. In Nazareth, if you believe church history, they'll take you to Nazareth, and right across the street from the Church of the Annunciation, they'll take you into a cave, and they'll tell you this is the cave that Joseph worked in. This is Joseph's workshop. So can you imagine you're in a town where people actually are in caves versus 5 miles down the road, 5 universities, 30,000 stalls in the marketplace, cosmopolitan, polylingual, Mona Lisa of Galilee, the houses. If you were putting your money on which one of those would impact the world, which one would you say? You're not going to say Nazareth, but Nazareth did impact the world. But I think, given that imagery, Jesus is saying, what should Israel have been to the surrounding nations in darkness? What should they have been like? City on a hill. I remember one time I got to go to Paris, and my wife got to go with me, and I remember we were kind of young when we went, and we decided to go up the Eiffel Tower, and it was at night. And so I think there's an elevator up most of the way, and then you walk a little bit. And I remember getting to the top of the Eiffel Tower, looking out over Paris, and just below the Eiffel Tower is the Seine River, and they have those long tour boats going down, and just across the Seine is Notre Dame Cathedral, and then in the background Paris. And I remember the first time I looked at that, it took my breath away how beautiful it was. No picture could describe how beautiful Paris is from the Eiffel Tower at night. I mean, it's just beyond imagination. I think that's what Jesus is saying God had created Israel to be. Did Israel measure up to that? God says to Israel, I want you to be a holy people. I want you to be my people. I don't want you to be like the nations around. Did Israel succeed at that or fail at that? They failed. So Jesus starts going to the law, and he's saying, don't think that what I'm saying is that it's okay to be adulterers. Don't think that what I'm saying is it's okay to be thieves. Don't think what I'm saying is it's okay to be idolaters. He's saying, I'm not saying that. Now, if you're Matthew and you're hearing that, what's going through your mind? I'm confused now. So Jesus gave me hope. Blessed are the spiritually bankrupt. But now he's talking about obedience to the law. And I don't have obedience to the law. I'm confused. Notice what he says. Unless you all's righteousness is better than the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heavens. And notice that's verbatim, exactly. You're not going to go in if your righteousness doesn't exceed. So I'm in the back as Matthew thinking, well, Jesus offered hope to somebody who's completely spiritually bankrupt, but now he's talking about the people who enter the kingdom of heaven actually are righteous. I'm a little confused. So he starts off with exposition of the law, and he starts off with, you will not murder. Which commandment is that?
6.
It's 6. In my view, it's the first one in the man table, because I think honor your father and mother is in the God table. I think it's a principle, just like don't covet is a principle. Others put honor your father and mother first in the man table. I don't know. All I know is Jesus started with 6. So 6 is don't murder anybody. 6 doesn't say you shall not kill, because there are times when killing was righteous. It was righteous for David to kill Goliath. What 6 says is don't commit murder. Now, if you're Matthew and you're hearing the law and it says don't commit murder, what's running through your mind at that point? You hear, I've got to have perfect obedience to the law, and Jesus starts with don't murder. What, if you're Matthew, what's running through your mind? I'm good. I may be a liar, I may be greedy, I may be a collaborator, but at least I haven't murdered anybody. Yeah, if he starved him to death or something. But notice what he says. You've heard it said, you will not murder. But I say to you, the one who is orgizomenos against his brother. So Jesus, and let's just put Jesus to Matthew, saying, Matthew, if you are just out of your mind angry with your brother, you've killed him. Now, how does that strike you? Have you ever been out of your mind angry at somebody? I mean, where you just want to... I've told you all before about that fist fight I about got in at church that day. I mean, I was angry at that guy. I was calculating whether or not the robe would impede my arm. And it was running through my mind, he's a big guy, but I think I can knock him out. I mean, that was kind of, and I'm thinking, this is going to look really bad, the two of us on the ground trying to kill each other.
Have you told this story? I don't know the story.
So there was a guy at my church, and he was a good guy, but he had issues. And I think I'm a good guy, but I've got issues. That guy knew how to push my button. I guess I pushed that guy's button. One day in Sunday school, he had made a comment about rape. And why in the world he said this, I don't know. But he had made the comment, sometimes rape is pretty close to consensual sex, and sometimes it's just flat out violation. For the life of me, I don't know why you would ever say that. That is a fundamentally thing not to say. What he didn't know is that in the back of that room there was a woman who was 65 years old who had just been raped. Her husband walked in on the rape and rescued her. She was in mental distress, living off of medication. So it's about 5 minutes before the service, and this woman and her husband came to me and said, "This is what so-and-so said." And I mean, she is crying her eyes out. Her husband is just standing there quivering, not knowing what to say. And this man had studied at Harvard. He was smart. He had been a prison warden. He had run Walpole Prison in Massachusetts. And he knew how to push my button. But I went to him and I said his name. I said, "You're going to go apologize to this woman." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because what you said was wrong." And I'm not the fastest person on my feet. And that guy was really quick in terms of mental, and like, he was just tagging me with everything I said. He would say 10 reasons why that wasn't right. And I'm just getting madder and madder and madder. I'm sitting there praying to God, "God, please help me not hit this man." I mean, my arms are shaking. And he saw how angry I was, and we were having communion that day, and this is one of the most wicked things I've ever done. It's one of the most wicked things I've ever said to anybody. But he said, "I can see you've lost your temper." And he said, I can see that the best thing for me is to go home today and not take communion from your hand." And I'm usually not the kind of person who tags people verbally. It may be that I don't think quick enough. Like, I tell people I have 2 gears, nice and nuclear. And I really work for it never to go in nuclear. But that day it had gone in nuclear. And I said, called the man's name. I said, "The best thing," and this is wicked, this is so wicked. I said, "The best thing you could do for any church is to go home and to never come back." That's not a good day as a pastor. I'm a Presbyterian pastor. I've got this beautiful robe on, all these things. We're about to have communion. And I just tell a man that the best thing he could ever do is never come back to a church. Was I orgidzomenos against that man? Was Jesus telling me in the eyes of the law that I committed murder? I'd have beat that man senseless if I could have gotten away with it. And it was wrong. It was hideous. It was the ugliness of my human nature. Is what he did right? No. But is what I did equally as wicked? Jesus said the command, "Thou shalt not murder," that I had all but murdered that man that day. And I was in a preaching robe about to celebrate communion, and I committed murder. Jesus says it's not only if you've lost your temper like that, but if you call someone idiot. If you've ever devalued somebody as a human being, you've murdered them. Well, have you ever devalued somebody as a human being? Jesus is saying that the Mosaic Law is calling us to a place where we don't devalue other people. Is calling us to a place where we don't absolutely lose our temper with someone else. And ultimately, do you see that law obedience is actually being this city shining on a hill? Do you see the connection of Jesus' thought? Now, I didn't know this about the man at the time, but he had lost a child. A child had drowned and had drowned in his lake, and he didn't know how to deal with that as a person. So his response was, I'm just going to be as mean and grumpy to as many people as I can. I'm just going to say smart things so that people know I'm smart. That's how he coped with the death of his child. If I had been a good pastor, would I have figured out a way to love that guy, to pray for him, to work with him? Maybe going to him on a Sunday morning and telling him he had to apologize, maybe that wasn't right. Maybe I was less concerned about that woman who had been raped and more that the man had hurt my friend. I don't know. But I know my motives weren't right. And I know that Jesus' interpretation of the law says I was guilty of murder. I'm called to be a city on a hill, and I'm not a city on a hill. So then Jesus moves to command 2. Don't commit adultery. And many married people would be able to say, well, I've never committed adultery. I'm good on that one too. I haven't murdered anybody. I haven't physically done the act of adultery. How does Jesus interpret adultery? Your heart. So what counts as an adultery? Looking at a woman lustfully. Okay. Most people are going to say, well, Jesus, if you're interpreting it that way, we're guilty. But Jesus goes beyond even that. He says, how serious should you be about the lust that comes through your eye? He says, treat that eye like it were a bomb that's about to go off. And if you can stop the lust by getting rid of the eye, it's better that you get rid of the eye and not have the lust. You can see where Jesus is going with this. The problem is, will those things cure a lustful heart? No. Now, why is he putting the divorce statement with adultery? Notice what he says. If you divorce your wife, you make her commit adultery. So Jesus is saying, you just decide you don't want to live with the woman you married anymore, and you say, well, we're just going to get a divorce. Jesus is saying, if you make that woman sexually sin, you're guilty of her adultery. Do you see him saying that? So, would he say to a woman who dresses immodestly, maybe you don't mean anything by it, but you dress immodestly and somebody lusts after you, have you kept the command or not? And Jesus says no. I ran across an article on sexual purity, and it was written by a woman. It was on John Piper's website, and she was this very gifted writer, and she talked about, well, if you're engaged to be married, how far is too far? And so she starts going through a list, you know, is it okay to hold hands? Is it okay to hold hands if it's only a minute? Is it okay to kiss? Can you kiss with your mouth closed? Can you kiss as long as it's 15 seconds or less? Can you French kiss as long as it's 10 seconds, and then she said, those are the wrong questions to ask. That's trying to find some magical limit. She said, isn't the question we should ask, what can I do to fulfill the law? That's a completely different question. What can I do to promote sexual purity? That's a different question. It seems to me that that's what Jesus is getting at and saying each one of these laws isn't about what you don't do. It's about having your character conform to the holiness of God. That's what it means to be a city set on a hill, that people can look at your life and say, yes, that's something that I want to copy. Jesus is saying to the people in that crowd, that's what God's called you to do. You're the salt. Now, you're Matthew, and you're hearing these things. What's running through your mind?
I'm done for.
I'm done for, but Jesus said, what's the very first words out of his mouth? Blessed are the spiritually bankrupt. Blessed are you when you don't have two spiritual nickels to rub together. And don't you imagine Matthew gets to a place where he says, well, Jesus is calling me to a life of holiness, and I am nowhere close. But he held out the promise that I could be blessed if I was spiritually bankrupt. I can be spiritually bankrupt.
What about, well, what do I have to do?
What do I have to do?
So it's almost like Jesus, instead of bashing him upside the head, gave the hope first, and then explained why you need that.
Yeah, it said this is the standard, and you say, okay, I've got the hope. I'm nowhere close to this standard, but Jesus, if you're the new Joshua, I'm going to follow you. You tell me what to do.
That was really the lesson of the rich young ruler, right? He comes to Jesus and he says, what do I do to gain eternal life? I've done all these things, but something's missing. And Jesus says, one thing you lack, go sell everything you have to the poor and follow me.
Yeah,
Simply come to me,
yeah,
empty, bankrupt, without any vice, without any virtue, and let me fill you.
yeah. And that guy wouldn't.
Walked away sad.
Walked away. It's interesting that at this point, Jesus doesn't share the gospel with Matthew. He hints at the gospel, but he lets Matthew feel the weight of the law. That's what he's doing. Wesley called this plowing the fallow ground of the heart by preaching the law. Wesley said that he would always go to a church and preach the law until somebody started crying. He said, and then I would really preach the law. And Wesley is saying he was breaking up the fallow ground, helping people see, I'm not okay with God. I'm not following the Ten Commandments. These are great rules. They're reasonable, but I'm not doing it. I've got a problem.
No, it's supposed to be a willing tool, because unless you recognize you need a savior,
You're never going to want one. So it seems to me that the end of 5, you must be perfect. How perfect is perfect? As your heavenly Father is perfect. Now I'm Matthew sitting in the back and thinking, okay, you gave me hope, but this perfect thing, I don't know how to do it. This is going to start to give us the hint of an answer in chapter 6.
That phrase where it says be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, is there a way you can see if that's repeated?
That so warms my heart. So we're looking for a root. And the root we're looking for is tau, epsilon, lambda, epsilon iota, and I'm going to put an asterisk because I want all the verbs, nouns, everything. So you tell me, does it appear a lot in the Old Testament?
Tiny bit.
So I'm going to do some fun things. Does it appear in the New Testament? But those wouldn't be important for us to look at, would they?
If I had to guess, most of them in the Old Testament probably have to do with Israel obeying God's law and being separate. But that's not.
And I don't know about this one, but I'm pretty sure that's the last words out of Jesus' mouth. And I don't know about this one either, but I'm pretty sure it's describing people in heaven. But nothing good can ever come from carefully studying God's Word, right? So I'll see you on Thursday.